The Black Sea has always been more than just a body of water. For centuries, it has been a corridor of commerce, an arena of empires, and a stage where geopolitical destinies are written. At its northern shore lies Crimea, a peninsula that has stood at the intersection of East and West, empire and rebellion, oppression and hope. Today, once again, Crimea has become a lightning rod of global politics. The Russian annexation in 2014, celebrated in Moscow but condemned almost everywhere else, has trapped the peninsula's people in a grinding cycle of repression, militarization, and silence. But silence can only hold for so long. Justice has a way of clawing through even the thickest walls of propaganda. And in Crimea, that truth is finally breaking the surface. Ordinary Russians, Ukrainians, Crimean Tatars, and countless other communities who live under Moscow's imposed rule are showing unmistakable signs of exhaustion. They can't take it anymore. The economic decay, the political suffocation, the ever-present surveillance of the security services, all of it has built up to a breaking point. For years, the Kremlin believed it had succeeded in burying resistance beneath layers of fear. Yet as the war in Ukraine grinds on and Russia pours men and money into sustaining its grip, the peninsula has begun to rumble from within. Talk of no-fly zones, once a faraway term from the wars of the Middle East, has started to circulate in the cafes, in the whispers of marketplaces, and across the encrypted chats of Crimea's younger generation. To them, a no-fly zone is more than just air defense. It is a metaphor for freedom, a demand for space to breathe without the constant roar of Russian military jets overhead, without the looming threat of missile silos on their land. This is where the story of justice begins, not in official decrees or at diplomatic tables, but in the pulse of a people who have endured too much. A peninsula at the crossroads of history. To understand why Crimea's present reality feels so unbearable, one must first revisit its past. Crimea has been fought over by Scythians, Greeks, Mongols, Ottomans, and Tsarist Russia. It has been a place where cultures intertwined. The Turkic Crimean Tatars, Russian settlers, Ukrainian farmers, and even remnants of ancient Greek colonies. For much of the 20th century, it was a peaceful, if often overlooked, province within the Soviet Union. In 1954, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev transferred Crimea from the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic to the Ukrainian SSR, a gesture that seemed minor at the time. Yet decades later, when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, that decision suddenly mattered. Crimea became part of the newly independent Ukraine. For more than 2 decades, Crimea lived under Kiev's sovereignty. The peninsula was not without its tensions. Crimean Tatars returning from Stalinist deportations demanded rights, pro-Russian groups pushed for closer ties with Moscow, but it was a region where political debate remained possible. Tourists from Kiev, Moscow, and abroad came to Crimea's beaches. Crimean cities hummed with multilingual chatter. Sevastopol, the home of Russia's Black Sea Fleet, was leased to Moscow under an agreement that symbolized uneasy cooperation. Then, in 2014, everything changed. Annexation and the weight of occupation. The Russian annexation of Crimea in March 2014 was swift and, for many residents, bewildering. Little green men, masked soldiers without insignia, appeared on the streets. Ukrainian bases were surrounded. A hastily organized referendum under Russian military occupation declared overwhelming support for joining Russia, though international observers rejected the vote as illegitimate. For Vladimir Putin, annexing Crimea was a geopolitical triumph. It boosted his domestic approval ratings to stratospheric levels, fueling nationalist pride. State media portrayed Crimea as returning home after decades of separation. But for the people of Crimea, the reality was far less glorious. Almost overnight, freedoms contracted. Independent media outlets were silenced or pushed underground. Schools rewrote curricula to match Russian narratives. Crimean Tatar activists faced arrests, intimidation, and forced disappearances. Property seizures, especially of Ukrainian state assets, reshaped the peninsula's economy in favor of Moscow's loyalists. The annexation also brought international isolation. Western sanctions targeted Crimean businesses and individuals. Tourists from abroad largely stopped coming. Banks pulled out, unable to operate under sanctions. The once thriving tourist economy shriveled. Jobs became scarce. And above it all, the militarization of Crimea accelerated. Russia poured troops, weapons, and aircraft into the peninsula. Airfields expanded. Missile systems dotted the coast. Warships patrolled the Black Sea with renewed intensity. Crimea, once marketed as a holiday destination, became a fortress. For ordinary people, this fortress was a prison. Life under the shadow. 10 years later, life in Crimea is defined not by prosperity or stability, but by fatigue. The Kremlin has tried to project an image of normalcy, parades on Russian holidays, glossy construction projects like the Kerch Bridge linking Crimea to Russia, propaganda touting investments. But beneath the surface, discontent simmers. Prices are high, jobs are scarce, young people see no future beyond conscription or migration. Crimean Tatars face relentless discrimination, their cultural institutions have been dismantled. Surveillance is constant. Speak too loudly against the authorities, and the FSB may come knocking. The war in Ukraine has only deepened the despair. Since 2022, Crimea has become both a launchpad for Russia's aggression and a target for Ukrainian counterstrikes. Explosions at military bases, drone attacks, and sabotage operations have shattered the illusion of safety. Civilians live with the fear of sudden blasts, but also with the knowledge that they are pawns in a larger struggle. Even many ethnic Russians, those who once supported annexation, now whisper of regret. The return to Russia promised stability, but it delivered sanctions, shortages, and endless war. "We can't take it anymore," has become a quiet refrain across the peninsula, murmured in markets, in homes, in hushed conversations on buses. Justice rising. Cracks in the wall. History shows that occupation breeds resistance. In Crimea, resistance has taken many forms. Crimean Tatars have kept their culture alive despite repression. Underground networks share banned Ukrainian music and literature. Young activists risk prison by painting graffiti or organizing protests online. Even within the Russian population, cracks are visible. Some refuse to cooperate with military mobilization, hiding their sons from recruiters. Others spread anonymous leaflets denouncing the war. The courage is quiet but undeniable. Internationally, Crimea has never been forgotten. The world continues to recognize it as part of Ukraine. Ukrainian leaders, from Petro Poroshenko to Volodymyr Zelensky, have repeatedly declared, Crimea will return. And as Ukraine's military grows stronger, the once unthinkable prospect of liberating Crimea now feels within reach. The symbolism of justice, of undoing the 2014 theft, has become a rallying cry. For Crimeans trapped under occupation, every Ukrainian strike against Russian military targets is not just warfare, but vindication. The no-fly zone is a cry for freedom. In recent months, a phrase has gained unusual traction. No-fly zone. Originally used in conflicts like Iraq and Libya, where international coalitions banned hostile aircraft from operating in certain skies, the term has now taken on a metaphorical meaning in Crimea. For those living under the thunder of Russian jets and missiles, the idea of a no-fly zone represents more than military protection. It symbolizes the hope of breathing without warplanes overhead, of walking streets without checkpoints, of living in a space not dominated by occupation forces. Social media posts from Crimean youth hint at this desire. We need a no-fly zone for our lives, for our thoughts, for our future. To them, justice means not only liberation from Moscow's grip, but the creation of a new kind of airspace, free, unshackled, and safe. The Kremlin dismisses such sentiments as Western propaganda, but anyone listening carefully to the mood on the ground knows otherwise. Crimea is reaching its breaking point. Justice, long delayed, is beginning to pierce the horizon. Conclusion to Part 1. The story of Crimea is not yet finished. What began as annexation has evolved into occupation, repression, and now a growing resistance. The people, Russians, Ukrainians, Tatars, and others, have endured years of silence, but silence cannot last forever. The idea of justice is taking shape, embodied in whispers of freedom, in small acts of defiance, and in the dream of a no-fly zone that protects not only skies but lives. Crimea stands at the threshold of change. The question is not if justice will come, but when and how.